Hey, welcome. This is Lee Waller, and I'm working with Unreal Engine's motion design tools. And this project I'm working on right here is not quite finished, but I thought I'd go ahead and take a look at cloners. The background of this motion graphic that you're seeing right now is built with cloners, and then also the Flames text at the top is using cloners. So let's jump into this and take a look at cloners and effectors. I've started a new level in the project and I'm in the motion design mode. To add a cloner to your scene, you're going to need to go down to actors, and then you'll see the cloner actor right there. Couple of ways of adding that in. I'm just going to double click and that will add the cloner in, and it defaults with this set of cubes. You'll see the cubes here in the viewer, and also up here in the motion design outliner, you'll see your cloner object. In the cloner object, you'll have the default cube. We're going to take a look at that a little bit later, how you can change that out to other objects. But we'll take a look now at the cloner itself. I'm going to bring the details panel, and this is where we're going to do most of our work to adjust the cloner. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this a little bit so you can see this object a little bit better. And the object is made up of 27 cubes. In the details panel down here, you'll see that we have our location, rotation, and scale, all of our transform properties. Anytime that you're on the cloner, it's going to affect the entire set of clones. Below that, you'll see the option for the cloner itself. We'll take a look at the force update and then the spawn linked effector later. But right now, you'll see that we have an enable button to turn that on and off, a seed option, and then effectors. Below that is where you're going to do most of your work in the layout. Right now, this is set up for a grid, and you'll see that we have a number of options, and I'll take a look at all of those in just a minute. But then you can begin to add the clones. For this grid, it's set up for X, Y, and Z, of course. The other layout options will have similar properties to this, but it'll be based on what they're creating. I am going to jump back up here to the default cube, and I'm going to decrease the size of it real quick. So I'm going to set that up to a 0.2 for right now. And you can see that's the way that you'll change the size of the object that is being cloned. Go back into the cloner and into my layout options. And now I can begin to increase the number of clones. I'm going to go ahead and set this X to 50 and the Y to 50. And then I'm just going to bring the count on Z down to 1. And so we have this field of cubes on an XY axis. Let me set that back to 0. And then I'll bring this down just a little bit. The spacing does exactly what it sounds like. It's going to affect the spacing between the cubes. So I'm going to bring this down to 25 on each. And now we have a plane of about 2,500 cubes. If I want to add any on the Z count, of course I can do that. And I'll push that back in Z space. And so you can use this in any number of different ways. I'm going to set my Z count back to 1, and I'll look at this constrain property here. You have 3 options. The first is a sphere. So I'll rotate that just a little bit. You can see that it has constrained the shape of all of the clones to the sphere. And then we'll go back and we have a cylinder, which with the cylinder, we do want some objects on the Z count. And then lastly, we have a texture. I'm going to set my Z count back to 1. And right now we've not added a texture in. So I'm going to go down here to the texture constraint, and I'm going to search for, I know that there is a logo in here, UE4, and I'll use that logo. And you'll see that the white areas of the logo, the clones are appearing, and then in the dark areas, nothing is appearing. So I'm going to rotate this so that we can get a better look at it. There's a few more options to this. You can invert the constraint. I'll set this up real quick. I'm going to close this cloner up right now, and I'm going to duplicate it, Control D. And with that duplicated, yes, I have 2 versions of that. And what I'll do is go to the second one, and I'll invert the constraint. And then what we can do is, on our material, we can add a different material to each. So I'm just going to quickly add in a material. So you can see that there are many possibilities with this. I'm going to go ahead and delete my second cloner. And I'll go back into our original cloner and take a look at some of the other options that we have there. So let's take a look at the rest of the layout options. The next layout is line. And you'll see there that it lays them out exactly as it says, in a line. And you can change the axis that this is on. And then rotation works on the entire line and not the individual objects. The next one we'll take a look at is circle. And that's simple enough. Those objects rotate around a circle. And then we also have the angle ratio and the angle start. And I'm going to draw this angle ratio into a negative number. And then you can see how we can create maybe a half circle, something along those lines, and then you can rotate that. If you don't want the objects oriented towards the mesh, you can deselect that option. And then you can choose the plane that you want this on. And then also the scale. I've got that set to free right now. This is going to affect the circle that they're wrapping around. The next layout option is cylinder. And I'm going to increase the count there. And you'll see the number of height options that we have. Let me rotate this back just a little bit so we can see this better. So if I want more sections along the height of the cylinder, I can increase that. And then we also have the height option to spread that out. And then the radius. Again, with the angle start and the angle ratio. You can also orient this along the mesh. And as with the circle, you have the option to change the plane and the scale. The next one is a sphere. And it's going to wrap around a sphere uniformly. So to take a look at this, I'm just going to drop a sphere in there real quick. And I'll set this back to 0. And then I'll bring the radius in. And so you can see how they are wrapping around the sphere. And one interesting option on this is the ratio. So if I bring that down, you'll see that all of the objects begin to collapse back into the original. So you can use that on an animation. And with the others, again, you have the option to change the orient to mesh, the rotation, and the scale. Our next layout is a honeycomb. And let me get rid of that sphere real quick. And I'm going to rotate this. And I'll decrease the spacing so we can see this a little bit better. So unlike a grid where the rows and columns are lined up, you see that they alternate on the honeycomb. You have the options to change the width count, the height, the offset, and the spacing. The next layout is the mesh. And so for this option, we're actually going to need to add in a mesh. Now the 2D shapes and the 3D shapes will not work because they're not considered meshes. So we will drop down here to meshes and we'll add in a cube. And so now we'll go back to the layout options. We've selected mesh, the count of clones that we want. And the asset there, we want to make sure that it is static mesh, vertices. And now what we need to do is select what we want these clones to attach to. So I'll go to that static mesh right there. And now you see that the clones are attached to that static mesh. You can go up to the static mesh and I'll just rotate this and you see that they are attached. Now the way that they are attached at the moment is based on vertices of this mesh. And so I can change that to triangles. And the static mesh does not have sockets or bones, but it also has sections. I'll go back to vertices. And one thing I need to do is adjust my rotation there. And you'll see that they are now connected to the vertices of this object. I'll go back into the cloner and I'll increase the number of count. And I'll rotate that static mesh a little bit more. The next layout is a spline. And so I'll get rid of this static mesh, go back to my cloner, and I'm going to need a spline, which basically is a line. And so over here in Actors, I'll click on the spline. I'm going to double click on that, and it drops a spline in there for us. Back in the cloner, just like we did with the static mesh, I'll need to select that line. So another way of selecting an object is to use the eyedropper. Click on that, then go to that object and select it. And now the clones are lined up on that spline. With the spline, you can create many different types of shapes. I'm going to hide the cloner for right now and go back to the spline. I'm going to select the spline and just right click in here. And I'm going to add a spline point. And I can adjust these spline points by clicking on them and then using the handles. And I'm going to bring the cloner back in now. And you'll see that the cloner is following the shape of that spline. Back to the cloner, and I can increase the number of objects. And then I can also orient to mesh. And our last layout option is wrapping around a sphere randomly. So very much like the sphere that we had earlier, this is just going to randomly wrap around it. And you have the option to change the distribution, the longitude, and the latitude. I'm going to take a look at effectors now. As the word indicates, it affects what is in the cloner. There's a couple of ways of adding an effector. If you want to go ahead and add the effector so that it is attached to the cloner, select the cloner that you want to add the effector to, drop down into the details, and you'll see the spawn linked effector. I'm going to click on that. And now an effector, as you'll see right here in the Motion Design Outliner, has been added to this cloner. In the details panel under cloner, you'll see that we have now this effectors with that effector listed. I'm going to select the effector. You'll see that it has transform properties, effector properties, type, mode, and force properties. The effector is depicted in the viewport by whatever shape it is set at. Right now, it is set at a sphere. The location properties will move that effector. You can also use the gizmo to move the effector. The effector can also be animated. You can rotate the effector and you can also scale it. Under the effector, you'll see that you can enable or disable the effector, and the magnitude is the strength of the effector. Under the type, right now we are using a sphere, and the other options are a plane, a box, and then unbound. I'm going to go back to the sphere for right now. The easing has to do with the motion of the effector and the way it is affecting the clones. So this easing right here as the effector moves through, you can see it is on a linear motion. There's a number of options in here. So I'll go to this out bounce. And you can see how that changes up the effect on the motion. I'm going to go back to linear. And we'll have an inner radius and outer radius for a few of these types. You can see that the outer radius increases that outer radius of the sphere. And then the inner radius, of course, will affect that inner radius. I'll reset those. In the mode options, we have three different types of mode. The default that we're working with now, a target, and a noise field. We'll look at the target real quick. The target actor right now is the effector, but we can change that. So I'm going to drop a sphere in the scene real quick, and I'll bring that down. I'll go back to my effector, and I will choose that sphere as my target. And so now everything is looking towards this sphere. And for this example, I'm going to make the effector a child of the sphere. Grab the effector, drag it onto the sphere and drop it. Now it's a child of the sphere. So wherever I move the sphere now, the effector is also going to move. I'll reset that. I'm going to pull the effector out from the sphere and get rid of the sphere for right now. I'll go back into the effector and change the mode from target to noise field. I'm going to reset the location properties for the effector. In the type, I'm going to change this from sphere to unbound. And this opens up the effector to affect the entire field. So we'll start off by adjusting the location strength. Of course, we can add rotation into that. And on the scale, I'll actually decrease the size of these. So you can see that the noise field is distorting this field of clones based on the information we've given it. I think the best way to think of this noise field is to think of a fractal noise image that has been generated. It'll be made up of very dark areas all the way up to very light areas. And based on that noise in that image, it will generate motion and distortion in this field. Now, this is a static image, but we can animate this using the pan and the frequency. And I'm going to go ahead and set this back to 0.5. And then the pan gives us the ability to add motion. So the more you adjust these, the more motion you'll get out of the noise field. Decreasing these will slow the rate down. And the frequency also affects the amount of motion. To take a look at the force properties, I'm going to reset all of this. I'm going to click on the cloner now and drop this down, and then go back to the effector, and we'll take a look at the forces. Click on the checkbox, and it will enable that force. With the orientation, it's constantly changing the orientation of the objects, and you can adjust the rate, and then you can adjust the minimum and maximum of how much those are being adjusted. I'll turn that one off, and we'll go to the vortex force, enable that one, and it takes off immediately. So to see this a little bit better, I'm going to have to bring this down quite a bit, and then I'll disable it and then re-enable it. And so based on the properties here, the vortex force axis is being adjusted on the z-axis by an amount of 1. I'm going to set that to 0, and we'll adjust it on the y-axis, disenable that, re-enable it. I'll go to the curl noise force, enable that. And again, the default settings are pretty high, so I'm going to bring that down. Disable it, re-enable it. And keep in mind that right now, the type of effector is unbound. We can set this to sphere, and let me disable that and re-enable it. And now when the sphere is dropped into the field, you'll see that wherever the field is, that force takes effect. You can also do that with the box. And let me reset this. And so again, wherever the box is, it will affect, and the duration that it lingers in that area also affects. We also have an attraction force. And on that one, I'm going to disable it, and I'm going to go back to unbound, and we'll enable that one. And for a few moments, you get a really interesting animation. You can slow that down, and again, reset that. And the last one, the gravity force, will probably work a little bit better with the box. And I will increase the extent of this a little bit. and then enable the gravity force. You can adjust the amount of gravity and actually send it in the opposite direction. Now that we've taken a look at effectors, let's begin to work on our background. I'm going to delete all of this and just kind of start fresh. And so I'll go back to our actors and just double click on the cloner actor. In creating this background, I'm going to introduce you to a couple of other options that we have. First is that we can change out the default cube to other objects. They can be 2D shapes, 3D shapes. They can be text, any type of object that you want to add in there. Just to demonstrate that quickly, I'll add in text. In that text object, let me bring that out front just a little bit. There's our text object, and I'm going to align it quickly. And then all I have to do to change this object out is the object that I want to clone. I'll just drag it in and drop it on top of the cloner. And now it is part of the cloner. It will accept multiple different types of objects. Now you see that we are cloning the text and the default cube. I can delete the default cube, and I'm left with just the text. So any of the options that we just went through on our cloner, we also have those with the text. Now for the background that I'm going to create, I want to use a 3D shape, the cube. So I'm going to double click it. It drops one cube in there. And then I'm going to bring that down, drop it on top of the cloner. And with that in there, I'm going to go delete the text. Now the reason that I chose this default cube is that in the shape properties, I have the ability to bevel this shape. I'm going to add the bevel in so that it creates more edges on the objects for reflections from the lighting. I'm going to scale the cube down to 0.5, and I'm going to add a material to this. Now the material I want is a very reflective material, and you can grab this material from Quixel Bridge. Once you've opened up Quixel Bridge and logged in, go to Surfaces, and I'm going to search for aluminum. And the one that I downloaded is this aluminum AL right there. Select it, and we can go to highest quality, download it, and then once it's downloaded, you can add it to your project. I've already downloaded it, so it's in my project. So I'm just going to close out of Quixel Bridge. You should see it in your content drawer once it's downloaded and added under Megascans, Surfaces, and there is the aluminum that we're going to use. To easily add this to the cube, I'm going to select the material right there, and then I'll just jump over here to my cube, go down to the material property for it. I'm going to need to change from simple to asset, and then I can use this button right here, which is use selected asset from the content browser. So the material that we just selected, once I click that button, it adds that material in. We'll now need to make some changes to our cloner. So selecting the cloner, and I'm just going to bring this up so I've got more room for my details down here. I'll go to the layout options, and we're going to use the cylinder option to create this background. For the base count, I'm going to bring this up to 100. For my height count, I'm going to bring this up to 50. And then for the height, I'm going to bring this up to 2000. And the radius will be 1000. Just so you can see this, we're actually inside of the cylinder at this point. So I'm just going to rotate this, and you can see there's the cylinder and we are inside of it. I'm going to set that back to 0. And to animate all of this, we're going to need to add an effector. So we can go right here to Spawn Linked Effector and click on that. And it has added an effector in. Just to show you how that is connecting to our cloner, you'll see right here that it has also opened up this effectors option, and it has added in that effector. So we set the type to unbound, and under mode, we're going to go from default to noise field. In the noise field, we're going to leave all of the location at 0, Under rotation, I will adjust this to 45 degrees on the Z-axis. And the scale strength, I'm going to set this to 0.5. On the pan settings, we'll set these to 5. And then on frequency, I'll set that to 0.3. You can see now that we have that noise field moving through our clones, rotating and scaling these clones. The rest of the effect for this background comes from the lighting. I'm going to add 4 point lights in to light this scene. I'll come over here to lights and I'll start off with my first point light. Just going to double click on that. Select that point light and then I'll move into the properties. Under mobility here, I'm going to make this movable. I'm going to change the intensity units from unitless to EV, and I'm going to set that intensity to 12. I'm going to change the color to a hexadecimal that I have. I'm going to paste that in. That's 041E42, and then hit OK. And I'm going to bring up the attenuation radius to full. I need to position this, so I'm going to go to my location settings, and I'm going to set this to 693 by 368 by 300. I'm going to duplicate that light, Control D, have the second light, and then I'll just bring that down a little bit. I'll add in my third point light, and again, with it selected, I'll change the mobility to movable. And I'm going to change the intensity to EV. And for these, this color is a little bit brighter. So on the intensity, I'm going to set that to 7. And I'll change the color here. I have the hexadecimal, paste that in, and it's 76232F. I'm going to hit OK on that. And bring that attenuation radius all the way up. And I will push this now over to the side. Actually, I'll position it. Its position settings are 513 by a negative 543 by 290. I'm going to duplicate that one. Control D, and I will bring that down in this area right here. And the last thing I'm going to do on lighting is in our scene, we already have some lighting going on. So I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to go to the default scene settings right here, open that up, and going to get rid of the directional light and the skylight. So the way that this background is working is the lights are reflecting off of the reflective material, the aluminum material that we've applied to the clones. And as the clones move around, motivated by this noise field, you can see that they are reflecting that light. By adjusting the cloner, the effector, or the lighting, you can get all kinds of different looks. In an upcoming tutorial, I'll take a look at recreating the rotating flames text and how I built out the rest of this design. I hope this has been helpful, and for more in Unreal Engine's motion design tools, hit the like and subscribe buttons.